Okay, hi everybody. My name is Omar McDoom. I'm a faculty member here in the Department of Government at the school, and I'm going to be the chair for the event this evening. We're very fortunate to have Lebanon's ambassador to the UK here. Obviously, this event is very timely, and we welcome the ambassador and his insights as to what's happening at the moment in terms of the war, but also his insights in terms of Lebanon's future, looking ahead to life after the war as well. Even though I'm your chair, really this event should be credited to the Lebanese Society of the LSE. Anthony here is from the society and will be co-moderating the discussion with myself. In terms of the structure for the event this evening, we've got, well, I guess about 80 minutes until 7:30. Anthony's going to give us an introduction to the ambassador. The ambassador will give some remarks, I think about 10 minutes. Then we'll have some questions and answers that the Lebanese Society has prepared. And then the last half an hour will be some questions and answers for you in the audience. Some ground rules. So this event is organized under the LSE's events policy. So we uphold freedom of speech and respect the right of the ambassador to voice his views within the law. And even though I'm not expecting disruptions, I ask though that we try to get as much as possible from today's opportunity from the ambassador. So polite and respectful exchange would be very welcome. I realize that this is an active conflict, an active situation. There are going to be strong feelings and strong views on this issue, but please avoid, if we can, speaking over the ambassador and give him the chance to voice his views. I believe the event is recorded, Anthony? Yes? Is there a hashtag as well?
I'm just here.
I see. Is there a hashtag for the event? Okay, no hashtag. And just a couple of housekeeping matters. Please put your mobile phones onto silent, so you can still keep them on, but just keep them on silent. And in the event of fire, I've been told to tell you that we assemble outside the double doors of this building. All right, so Anthony, I hand it over to you. You've got a couple of minutes to introduce the ambassador.
Thank you, Omar. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is our immense privilege to welcome all of you tonight to what promises to be a profound, timely, and insightful discussion. Our conference is titled Lebanon at War, a Diplomat's Perspective on the Path Forward. We're honored to host a distinguished guest, His Excellency Rami Mortada, Lebanese Ambassador to the United Kingdom. I think we can all agree that the timing of our conference could not be more relevant. Lebanon really stands at a crossroad. 2 months after a bloody, destructive war, 2 months before a new and unpredictable pro-Israel US administration takes office, 2 years without a president, and as all of you may know, just 2 days into the announcement of a 60-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. This 13-clause agreement, while offering temporary calm, raises pressing questions about its implementation, the responsibilities it imposes, and the profound challenges that lie ahead for Lebanon's future. All questions we'll explore tonight as we, I would guess, tackle a daily evolving topic at the heart of today's most urgent debates. The story of Lebanon is one of a lost paradise, perpetually drifting between broken dreams and internal turmoil. 18 years after the 2006 war, the country finds itself, once again, trapped in an imposed conflict. On one side, it is victimized by a powerful neighbor with the strongest army in the Middle East, whose Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, openly threatened to return Lebanon to the Stone Age. On the other side, Lebanon remains hostage to the actions of the most heavily armed militia in modern history. Also an Iranian proxy, I'm talking about Hezbollah, which on October 8, 2023, chose to auto-engage Lebanon in an open-ended resistance and support for Hamas in Gaza, dragging the nation once more into the crossfire. This escalation comes at a time when Lebanon is already grappling with the worst financial collapse since the US 1929 Great Depression, leaving its economy in ruin and its people in despair. Once celebrated as a symbol of diversity and resilience in the Middle East, Lebanon today, 419 days into the conflict, stands as a fragile and fractured state, with its sovereignty, unity, and very identity tested like never before. In such turbulent and uncertain time, very few individuals are as uniquely qualified to shed light on Lebanon's challenges and offer a vision for the future as His Excellency Ambassador Mortada. Far from being an ordinary diplomat, Ambassador Mortada represents a caretaker government in a country without a president for 2 years, navigating a deadly conflict with no pilot at the control. With a distinguished career spanning 3 decades in international affairs, His Excellency brings unparalleled expertise to tonight's discussion. From serving at the UN in New York to key postings in France, Oman, and Syria, and most recently as Lebanon ambassador the past 7 years in the UK, and 4 priors in Belgium, where we met. Ambassador Mortada is widely regarded as one of Lebanon's most accomplished and capable diplomats. A dedicated technocrat with rare yet unwavering faith in Lebanon's potential, he remains steadfast in his duty to defend and represent a broken government amidst extraordinary challenges. Tonight, we aim to move and go beyond headlines and pessimism to explore actionable solutions. While we'll definitely reflect on how Lebanon reached this tragic situation, our focus is on uncovering pathways toward a sustainable and hopeful future. Together, we'll explore how the international community, regional allies, the Lebanese diaspora, both Lebanese and non-Lebanese people, including you here tonight, can contribute to rebuilding our beloved cedar country. With that in mind, it is my privilege to invite His Excellency to share his reflections on this historic moment. We're all enthusiastic to hear your insights on Lebanon, current challenges, the implication of this ceasefire, and the potential pathways forward. But first, please join me all in giving Ambassador Mortada a warm round of applause. Ambassador, thank you once again for being with us tonight. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. I don't seem to find much to add to your introduction. I think you have it all. However, I will try to give some snapshot ideas because I think, and we discussed it, I want this event to be as interactive as possible rather than being me lecturing because Lebanon, I think, is well known to all of you. I don't know how much in the room there are fellow Lebanese or non-Lebanese. Well, I recognize some very familiar faces. But let me first start by thanking you, Anthony, and the Lebanese Society at LSE. I'm thanking LSE for hosting us in what looks like a very promising and intellectually challenging event. And I thank Omar also for accepting to share the panel. I'll be, as I said, very, very brief, trying to challenge you to ask the questions that you have or you might have in mind. But just to tell you that since Anthony and I agreed on having this event that was like 1 month ago or so, as Anthony just mentioned, a positive development on the conflict which was ongoing in Lebanon until 2 days ago. This very bloody and deadly conflict which took 4,000 lives in 12 months, including 250 children, and which forcefully displaced 1.4 million internally displaced into the country. This much aspired to and much well-crafted agreement that led to a halt, a ceasefire. Unlike what you said, it's not a 60-day ceasefire, it's a permanent ceasefire. That's how we like to look at it. However, the other side might have another interpretation. It is very unfortunate that Lebanon had to go through this unnecessary war, because while wars are carried out or are fought because there is a lack of a political avenue. In our case, in Lebanon, this political framework that could have ended the war or could have avoided the war exists, and it exists under the form of a Security Council resolution 1701 that was adopted back in 2006 and which has been governing the situation in South Lebanon between on our southern borders with Israel. But you know the story. On October the 7th, Hamas launched its operation, and by the way, we Lebanese, but also all the Arab countries, we condemned the atrocities that were committed on October the 7th. No one can condone the targeting of civilians. The next day, on October the 8th, Hezbollah thought of tilting the cost-profit equation for the Israelis and trying to hold them back from attacking Gaza. That was obviously wrong. The Lebanese government was not part of this decision-making. But Hezbollah started low to mid-intensity skirmishes, which throughout the rest of the year escalated, and Israel started escalating the conflict up until last September, when it became a full-fledged act of aggression against Lebanon, carpet bombing 80% or 70% of the Lebanese territory, and targeting civilians. The same toolkit that we witnessed throughout the year and we're still seeing in Gaza, the same toolkit of brutality and of terrorizing civilian population was used in Lebanon. I think this is part of a military doctrine that they always talk about, which is called shock and awe. Civilians were not collateral damage, but I think they were intentional targets in this war, because the war aim were to defeat the minds and to even defeat future generations in order to dissuade them from ever thinking of challenging their position. And in the Lebanese government, we've said early on that, of course, we were not part of the October the 8th scheme where the fire was open. But we've said we would be ready to recommit to this 1701 resolution, which, as I said, governs the situation in South Lebanon, and deploy the Lebanese army to South Lebanon to make sure that security prevails in that region. And we've said if the concerns from the other side is genuinely about their northern population, 1701 represents or includes a framework that guarantees security for all, but security needs to be reciprocal. any security is the byproduct of mutual security. They cannot have security if our side of the border is not secure. However, they chose to go this path of escalation. Meanwhile, the facilitators, international facilitators, namely the US, France, and the UK, by the way, played a role also. They started their efforts, which yielded 2 days ago with the announcement of this ceasefire, which in essence is nothing but recommitment to 1701. All the ingredients that came in this document that you might have seen are included in Security Council Resolution 1701. For us, of course, it's a glimpse of hope. We'd like to look at it as one piece of a puzzle. There are other pieces that we need to fill in subsequently. We want, once and for all, a sustainable security arrangement on our southern borders with Israel to make sure that sustainable security prevails in order for us to focus on our national agenda, which should imperatively now follow. Now that the war is hopefully behind us, I mean, there are still some uncertainties. As recently as today, the Israelis had, performed an airstrike again in Lebanon in full blatant violation of this ceasefire agreement. But once this is behind us, we'd like to focus on our national agenda because, as Anthony said, the war came in the midst of other crises. It's a perfect storm, as we refer to it in Lebanon, that has been ongoing since 2019 at least. Even prior to that, there were some other root causes of instability. But let's start from 2019, the economic crisis, total collapse and meltdown of the banking sector. Then came the seaport explosion, accompanied with a political crisis, and then 2 years ongoing of vacancy in the post of president of the republic, lack of economic reforms. So all these explosive, if you want, explosive ingredients in this bomb that is causing the havoc that you see currently in Lebanon. As I said, this ceasefire, we'd like to look at it as a trigger point for a new course for the country. The country has potential, as you might know. It's a country with freedom of speech. It's a country that has a magnificent diaspora in all 5 continents of the world, and I think we should capitalize on that to build the new economic and maybe political business model for the country and make it work. Having said this, if you want to build a house or a building, you cannot overlook or push aside your neighborhood. We obviously live in a very dangerous and volatile region. We're surrounded by different actors that are disruptive, not least Israel, which has been for years now for taking a very worrying course, tilting to the right with the nationalistic agenda and the warmongering agenda, going exactly in the opposite direction of its national interest itself. I always tell the friends of Israel in Britain, when they ask me what do you want us to do, I tell them I want you to be the real friends of Israel. Is what Israel is doing currently, does it really serve the real interest of Israel? Or is Israel planting the seeds of its own future vulnerabilities through its actions? The 40,000+ killed in Gaza are the same people that one day they would need to make peace with. So it's planting the seeds of anger, of frustration in its neighborhood, and that does not serve its long-term interest. But you have a government that is for different internal dynamics, wants to, the only strategy that they're adopting is a forever war strategy, continuously moving the goalposts forward, starting with Gaza and then with Lebanon. Maybe we needed 2 ceasefires, one for Gaza, one for Lebanon. Luckily now we have one for Lebanon. God knows with which third country we would need a ceasefire down the line in few months. So all this to tell you we have a very difficult, we have Syria of course on our eastern borders, which is another volatility and uncertain crisis, which now continues unabated since 2011 with all its repercussions on Lebanon, not least the 2 million Syrian refugees that Lebanon has been hosting since 2011. And beyond our immediate borders, we have the Middle East at large, which is, I always refer to it as a conceptually flawed regional order, because there is no regional order for the Middle East. I mean, it's maybe one of the few regions in the world, if not the only, that does not have a so-called security architecture, whereby all the stakeholders are accounted for and included in some sort of a multilateral format, and where they can discuss their grievances and define their mutually accepted rights and obligations. The culture of multilateralism does not exist in the Middle East, and that I think partly explains why this weakness in its regional order. Of course, other sources of uncertainty: the Arab-Israeli conflict, the elusive two-state solution that is becoming increasingly elusive with the current governing elite in Israel, because they're unwilling/unable, because it's ideologically, it goes against everything they stand for, this two-state solution. And that's a major source of uncertainty. Other sources of, again, you have how to deal with Iran, how to deal with Turkey, how to deal with as I said, the regional order is flawed, so all the stakeholders do not physically meet. The heads of state in the Middle East do not physically meet at a regular pace where they can discuss their grievances. It's like if you live in a building, if you have your flat, but you don't meet your neighbors to discuss the elevator or the entrance lobby, or you don't have the management company that organizes the different aspects that are shared between all these stakeholders. So that's where Lebanon is located. I would also add another international layer, international sphere, where we all live in a leaderless world. We have been witnessing lack of leadership in conflict resolution and enforcement of international law. And that's again another layer of complexity that is heavily weighing on the Middle East. But I'd like to end my introductory remarks with a glimpse of hope. I think everyone in the region has hit a bottom rock, and there should be something positive, hopefully, coming out from this dire reality. If there is an international floor or international level that is conducive to do things right in the Middle East, I think conditions are ripe. It's just that you have all the ingredients, someone needs to put them together. Including in Lebanon, which, as I said, is a country with great potential, with a very vibrant youth, very vibrant population, and has all the reasons to succeed, has a legacy of success, of entrepreneurship, of openness, of tolerance, and what people refer to as the sectarian system, which has now become a curse on Lebanon, originally was a virtue in the sense that when Lebanon was conceptualized, the founding fathers wanted to make sure that no single community controls the others. So they crafted this very delicate communitarian system where things are consensually decided in order to allow full representation and emancipation of different communities. It started as a virtue, but we had to move on, and that's what we haven't been able to do. But I'll stop here and open the floor for Anthony and Omar, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. So, Anthony and the Lebanese Society have carefully curated a set of fascinating questions. You can see the themes that they have chosen to draw as much as possible from the Ambassador's wisdom and experience to help you with understanding his views on. So we've got some questions. I'll go first and pick up where you left off, where you were talking about the sectarian balance in Lebanon and the power sharing arrangement that was put in place originally with Lebanon's independence in 1943, and then with the end of the Civil War in the Taif Agreement in 1989. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Lebanon's sectarian makeup. Lebanon is unusual in the Middle East for an Arab country. It's one of the most, if not the most diverse country, with a large Maronite Christian community, a large Shia Muslim community, a large Sunni Muslim community, as well as Druze and Greek Orthodox, among other groups there. And the arrangement that was put in place, and the one that is formally still in place, is a power sharing arrangement that was acclaimed as something good for Lebanon, to keep balance and to ensure representation. But the criticism that has been made of the sectarian power sharing arrangement is that even though it ensured balance, it means that none of the sectarian leaders, the Maronite Christian president, the Sunni prime minister, the Shia head of the parliament, are incentivized to put the national interest over the sectarian interest. So I wanted to ask your views on the sectarian power sharing arrangement, whether you think it still fits and is suitable for Lebanon, and if it isn't, what would be a better alternative?
I think we need to cruise between two very delicate lines here. We have, of course, to continue respecting the sectarian identities, because if people identify themselves as belonging to a religious community, the state must respect that. You cannot just oppress people simply because that's the only identity they identify themselves with. So representation of different religious components, that's very much necessary. But at the same time, you need to allow for the concept of citizenry to emerge. That's why the Taif Agreement, which is now our second constitution, came out with, I think, a very useful formula, which unfortunately has not been implemented yet, which is to create a bicommunal parliament and allow for a senate where different religious groups are represented in parity, and allow for non-sectarian representation in the parliament. The strategic decisions that may trespass on different religions or different rights are to be voted in the Senate, and the Parliament would allow for the parliamentary life and the country to be ruled on non-sectarian basis. That, I think, is a very creative and useful compromise, because you need to move on. As I said, when it was first adopted, there were two trends in the region. One trend towards autocratic regimes, which all our neighbors went through. The only exception was Lebanon, which for historic reasons, Lebanon was always the refuge for minorities since, I think, all history. Mountainous region that was always very, very hard to get. So it was always regarded as a refuge for minorities. And when the Lebanese state, by the way, the term Lebanon is a biblical term. That's why we differentiate between Lebanon and the Republic of Lebanon. Lebanon outdates the Republic of Lebanon. It's a biblical entity. Lebanon was mentioned in the Bible, I think 60 times. So it has a historic connotation, and it always had this kind of relative autonomy, even under the Ottomans. Lebanon, or the Mount Lebanon, always had relative autonomy because it was regarded as the safe haven for different minorities in the region. So when the Lebanese state was conceived, it was conceived to translate this legacy of the country, and this sectarian regime was put in place because we did not want to go to the other opposite, toward which all the countries of the region took. And we adopted a liberal economy, entrepreneurial economy. So it was only normal that we also adopt free speech, parliamentary democracy, elections. Parliamentary elections take place in Lebanon since 1926. Women started voting in Lebanon in 1956, I think. Before right of vote for women was given in many European countries. So we have a legacy of freedom of speech and of democracy that is still going on. This system, sectarian system, it just incorporated all these attributes that the country holds. Today, if you ask me, should we move on? Of course, but we should move on carefully because until further notice, religion or communitarian identity remains valid in Lebanon and in the region. So the state must take stock of that while trying to shape it and develop it cautiously. I think the Taif compromise that the constitution, our second constitution came with, is very useful in this regard.
Good, thank you. Anthony.
Thank you very much for this crucial information to understand the context, the complex context in Lebanon of the internal politics. I believe now is essential to turn our attention outward. You mentioned in your keynote speech the neighbors of Lebanon, which played a tremendous role. To the international and regional actors, Ambassador Mortada, over the years, and this was introduced at the beginning, you've been posted, which is very exceptional, in nearly all the key capitals shaping Lebanon's trajectory, whether during moments of crisis or opportunity. The US, European Union, France, Gulf states, the UK, and even Syria, which makes you kind of a unique candidate to assess how international and regional actors influence Lebanon today. I'm going to start where we met, actually. As Lebanon's former ambassador to Belgium and by extension to the European Union, how do you see Europe's role in Lebanon's future? Will Europe remain merely a financier but a junior partner? Or can it step up as a credible peace broker capable of facilitating not just ceasefire like what's happening now, but actual lasting solutions? And this question is kind of twofold, because speaking about Europe naturally brings us to France, where Your Excellency, you served 2 years at the French Embassy in Paris, and if I'm not mistaken, you recently met with President Emmanuel Macron. France's inclusion alongside the US in the recent ceasefire agreement, despite strong opposition from Prime Minister Netanyahu, in my opinion, raises important questions. Do you see this as purely US-driven? Do you see this as a deal between Macron and Netanyahu? Because we've seen that Macron openly stated that Netanyahu has now an immunity regarding the ICG's arrest warrant against him. And what, or is it part of a broader effort to reposition France for a more significant future role in Lebanon? For a bit of context, France holds deep historical ties with Lebanon. Most of Lebanese people speak French. Lebanon was for 20 years a French protectorate, but many Lebanese feel today that France has not acted decisively enough to honor its commitment to Lebanon. I do remember during the Beirut port explosion in 2020, President Macron going in the street and raising hope, vowing not to let Lebanon sink into chaos. Yet today, Your Excellency, that is precisely what is happening. So, can France still reclaim its role, and what is the role of Europe?
Yeah, very interesting question. I'm a firm believer in a multipolar world. And I think Europe, the European Union and its relevant member states ought to play a role in a more decisive role in international affairs. But this necessitates that Europe itself, I'm talking here about the EU, would be convinced of its leverage to play such a role and go beyond the donor approach. I always give this example on the Arab-Israeli conflict, and specifically on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The EU is the largest trade partner for Israel and the largest donor for the Palestinian Authority. And yet the EU does not have a political role in the conflict resolution between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So I think the EU should believe in its role in order for it to be able to start projecting influence, especially that we're talking about the Middle East, which is, they even refer to it as their close neighborhood. They call it, I think the technical term is southern neighborhood. Other powers, namely the US, can afford the luxury of either adventurism in the Middle East or isolationism, just disengaging from the whole region. They can afford this luxury because they're too far, they're too remote. Whereas for the Europeans, it's even not just foreign policy. I always tell my British interlocutors here, the Middle East is not foreign policy for you, the Middle East is domestic policy, because when you talk security, when you talk radicalization, when you talk relations between different communities and different towns in the UK, when you talk about migration, and we all know how much migration defined the recent general elections, all these have somehow to do, have intersections in the Middle East. So you cannot afford the luxury as the Americans could, because they're too big, they're too far, they're too remote. You Europeans cannot afford the luxury of disengaging from the Middle East. Having said this, we live in a world that is very transactional. If you do not have either the carrot or the stick, it has become so difficult to project influence in our world of today. Unfortunately, Europe is lacking both. It's a fact of life that European defense is still a very nascent project. Europe still irreversibly depends on American military, and we're all following the apprehension and the anxiety with now the upcoming American president, Mr. Trump, and what would be his position on NATO and on his commitment to the security of the European continent. And I think somehow NATO itself made it that the concept of interoperability that NATO came with, made it that no single European army can go to war on its own, because interoperability is about, if you invest in your Air Force, then no need for me to invest in my Air Force, I'll invest in the Navy. But if you need a full-fledged army to go to war, you need to bring at least 3-4 countries together, or else you would have a crippled army. And that's why if the Americans disengage from Afghanistan, Europeans should definitely follow. They cannot afford to remain after the Americans had decided to withdraw. Same in Iraq, same in Syria. So in this sense, with all due respect, they became followers. We all believe in an active European role, and I think it's in the best interest of our region, particularly in Lebanon, for us in Lebanon, because we've always had this openness towards Europe, this Mediterranean spirit opening window towards Europe. Cyprus is 30 kilometers, which is a member state of the EU, is 30 kilometers from our coast. So it's in our strategic interest to have Europe as part of, as recently as last week when we were negotiating this peace, this ceasefire. We insisted on having France as part of this monitoring mechanism, whereas the Israelis were dismissive because they were holding the position on ICC against them until they then declared that Mr. Netanyahu has immunity. But we insisted on having France, and I think France will be an value added because it has a principled position. It has been very helpful for Lebanon in the recent years before, and I think this will remain. Now, has President Macron been able to achieve much in Lebanon? I will tell you no, but this does not speak for his goodwill and for his intentions. He's been sending envoy after envoy to try to broker a solution for the economic crisis, then the political crisis, and now with the recent conflict. But as I said, it has to do with the leverage, what kind of carrot and what kind of stick you have in your hand. That's also valid for the UK, valid for all European countries. It's a transactional global order we live in, unfortunately. But to conclude, I would say we have a strategic interest in having both France and having the UK. I also work a lot with the UK to encourage them to be part of this, and they will. I think down the line we'll see an increasing UK role. They already are very active in military training with the Lebanese armed forces, and I think in the months ahead we'll see them doing more in Lebanon.
Thank you, Ambassador, for the comprehensive answer. I'm very conscious of the passage of time and the number of questions that Anthony was hoping to be able to ask you. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them, and I also want to make sure that we leave enough time for the audience as well. So maybe we'll ask just maybe a couple more questions and then open it up to the audience. I wanted to pick up on something you talked about a moment ago about the centrality of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to peace and security in the wider region, and for Lebanon specifically. And if you look at what's happened to Lebanon, the number of times it has been invaded by Israel, on each occasion it has had something to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? The PLO in the Civil War, Hezbollah in 2006, Hezbollah again this time. So my question then is, do you see peace and security in the region and for Lebanon itself as contingent on the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Would a two-state solution be that resolution?
That remains the central malaise in the region. That remains the most acute conflict in the region, and unless and until it is solved, I think it will be difficult to bring stability to the region. Of course, over the years, other collateral avenues have emerged. Other actors have stepped in, some disruptive actors, some non-state actors. But in order to solve a problem, you need to start from where you need to start, rather than deal with the symptoms and neglect and push aside the root cause. The root cause of this regional uncertainty remains the Palestinian question and the occupation of Arab land. And unless it's solved, you cannot irreversibly deal, for example, with the non-state actor syndrome. Because if you, however necessary it is to deal with the non-state actors, but you need to deal with the root causes, as I said, rather than focusing on the symptoms. When international legality and international law is not enforced, is not implemented, people or groups will just try to take things in their hands. This is not a justification. Of course, there was much wrongdoing by some of these non-state actors and maybe state actors, disruptive states in the region and beyond. But if you want to chart a way towards stability, you need to start from where you need to start, bringing justice to the most historically brutal conflict, which is the Arab-Israeli.
Thank you.
Not all the problems of Lebanon would be solved, but it will be a very good start and conducive.
Thank you for a very unequivocal answer to that question. Anthony, last question for you, I think, before we open it up to the audience.
Two questions, actually.
Okay, maybe ask them both at the same time then.
Okay. You mentioned, Ambassador, the importance of non-state actors. This actually brings me to a question about your daily unique job. Ambassador, representing Lebanon in a diplomatic capacity poses, I think, a unique paradox. Lebanon remains technically at war with Israel since the 1949 armistice. Yet today's conflict, and even the recently announced ceasefire, is largely framed as Israel versus Hezbollah. How do you navigate this duality? in your daily work balancing your role as the official voice of the Lebanese state in the UK, while also dealing with the reality of non-state actors like Hezbollah influence? And from that, what advice would you offer to aspiring diplomats in the audience who may one day face similar paradox and complexity?
I want to ask the second question as well, so he can answer both at the same time.
Okay, so I think this one is more into Lebanon. The ceasefire agreement we're all talking about actually tasked the Lebanese army with supervising all weapons, confiscating any unauthorized one, dismantling illegal military infrastructure, and filling the void left by Israeli forces south of the Litani River. Realistically, Your Excellency, how can this be feasible? In a landscape where Hezbollah already wields significant power, given the Lebanese army, limited resources, numerical inferiority compared to Hezbollah, and the challenge of identifying and profiling militants who can easily blend into civilians. And if just the scenario of a Lebanese soldier, if he does encounter Hezbollah militants, is there a practical mechanism to enforce compliance? Or is the army likely to defer to Hezbollah claim that its weapons are for defending Lebanon?
Okay, thank you.
So the two questions revolve around Hezbollah. I think Hezbollah should be cannot be assessed without considering the genesis, without considering what brought us here. Because if you want to deal with as much as a person or a group or an entity or a party, you need to understand where this is coming from. Hezbollah was born in 1983, 1 year after the Israeli occupation of 25% of the Lebanese territory. So I think if someone is to be blamed for the creation of Hezbollah, it's Israel. Had Israel not invaded Lebanon in 1982, had Israel not occupied Lebanon for 25 years, we would not have seen the Hezbollah we're seeing today, because it started with the local population in South Lebanon taking arms to resist and to try to liberate their country. Now, of course, over the years, things took other complexities. The Iranian Revolution at the time, which happened in '79, was looking around to project power and influence across the region, and it happened that Hezbollah originally was born in a Shia community, and the Iranians are Shia, so that's where this alliance started. So that's always to be taken into consideration while considering Hezbollah. And subsequently, over the years, our history, by the way, with Israel, with Israeli wars against Lebanon, is not confined to this 2024 war. We've had, as Anthony said, one in 2006, we've had the 96, we've had 93, we've had 82, we've had 78, and even in the 50s and 60s we were under continuous threats by Israel. So as I said, if someone is to be blamed for the erosion of the state at the time, because the formula is very clear. When you have a strong state, you wouldn't see the non-states. Already in a civil war-torn country back then in 1982, added to an Israeli invasion and occupation, the state was totally, nearly inexistent. That's when what became known subsequently as Hezbollah started. But we are here today. How to deal with this? You have a largely empowered popular party which has a popular mandate, but which still carries arms. Now, what this ceasefire agreement brought is that the south of Litani region is now vacant, not from Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is not a quantifiable entity. Hezbollah are the inhabitants of these towns and villages. Today I'm a Hezbollah fighter. When there is no war, no conflict, I'll be the carpenter in the village or in the town. No one has the right to throw me out. So what the pledge, the commitment that we took is that there would be no arms and no aggressive posture from our side of the borders. But then subsequently, and that's what I meant when I said we need to focus on our national agenda, and we do it for the sake of our own citizens, not because we're subjecting to international pressure, or definitely not to serve the interests of Israel. It's try to, around a national dialogue table in an inclusive way, address this, I call it an unconventional situation that Hezbollah represents. Of course, theoretically, the state should have the monopoly of holding arms. We have this unconventional situation whereby Hezbollah holds arms. It has its track record, it has its history, as I said. Now we need to address it to the best interest of, first, making sure that the country is well defended, because if you consider Hezbollah an unconventional situation, how about having Israel at your border, which is, to say the least, an unconventional state that has been for decades now in defiance of every single rule of international law, of international Security Council resolutions, and which has deployed unimaginable brutality over 2023, 2024. You have an international fugitive that is the Prime Minister of that country. If you have it at your border, you need to reflect on what's the best way to defend myself. So all these will be put together around a national inclusive Lebanese table, and all the grievances will be discussed, hopefully to be able to come out with a formula that addresses all concerns. Of course, part of the Lebanese do not agree with Hezbollah. There are parts who vote for him, but there is a big chunk of the Lebanese population who do not agree with Hezbollah, and their views should be taken into account to come up with this formula that defends the country well, but at the same time respects the centrality of the state and the interests of the country. That's my vision of how this should be addressed, and of course regional facilitation, because as I said, Hezbollah is also about the geopolitics of the region. Where would you see Iran? Where would the Trump administration be heading in its policies towards Iran? All these are also very relevant in finding this formula. But if you ask me what's the best interest of Lebanon, I would say yes, of course, we need to sit around this table as Lebanese and address it objectively with the high interest, best interest, national interest of the country as the prime and only concern that we would need to have in mind.
Great, thank you, Ambassador. Okay, finally, we have a chance now for you to ask your questions to the Ambassador. We have 2 microphones, so I will identify you. Please wait for the microphone to reach you. Please introduce yourself to say who you are, just the one. And ask a question. Just to remind you what a question is, so it's ideally a short sentence that ends in a question mark, rather than a long lecture. And I will take them in pairs so that we can get as much out of the Ambassador's time as we possibly can. I'd like to take the first question from a woman. So the lady here in the grey sweater, and then the gentleman here, So, this need to be. So remember to introduce yourself and.
So my name is Yumna. I'm studying social and public policy here at LSE, and I was previously doing my undergrad at the UB in political science in Beirut. And my question is, so Resolution 1701 has been thrown around numerous times during interviews and analysis, but this resolution assumes a certain level of political stability in the country where Lebanon can assume its sovereignty, but we know that so many external factors influence our politics. My question is, how can we come together knowing that we have this sectarian divide? Unfortunately, I know it's a cliche question, but that's the case. But also this political instability. How can we come together on have a national dialogue, have all of these different political parties come together on the same table to ensure a sustainable but also politically stable future for Lebanon?
Good, thank you. And if you would pass the microphone to the gentleman there with the black sweater.
Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Milton. I'm a student of International Relations at King's College. My question is, during your introductory remarks, you mentioned that there is no real security arrangement in the Middle East, no culture of multilateralism. So in your sense, is that a feasible arrangement? Is that something that could exist? And if it did, what would it look like? Thank you.
Okay, so just to summarize so people understand. So the first question is about how do we stop people thinking I'm Shia first, Lebanese second, and the second question about the multilateral security arrangement for the region.
Yeah. So on Mira, that's
No.
Yumna. So on 1701, yeah, 1701 worked relatively well. We don't live in a perfect world, but from 2006 up until October the 8th, 2023, it worked well. Paradoxically, the Lebanese-Israeli borders were among the most stable among Arab-Israeli borders. It's even more stable than the Syrian Golan. No single incident, maybe except one or two, were registered from 2006 up until 2023. So it is a resolution that carries the potential to succeed. You're right in the sense that it needs the proper governance from Lebanon. That's why I said we should not fall to the comfort of having achieved this ceasefire. We should immediately start focusing on our national agenda, which imperatively should start with the election of a president, formation of a government, empowering the Lebanese army, because the Lebanese army is the main tool which will be implementing 1701 in South Lebanon, and then start with the reform process to be able to provide sustainable stability in the country. Having said this, it needs two to tango. 1701 was, despite the fact that it brought stability during the period 2006-2023, but it was under continuous violation from Israel. By air, land, and sometimes by sea. I think the violations from 2006 to 2023 amounted to 37,000 Israeli violations to 1701. That's why we said during these negotiations it needs to be symmetrical. You cannot claim your security if it's not mutual security. But I totally agree that it's not the end of the road, and that we shouldn't fall into the comfort of that the ceasefire is here. It needs to be maintained and developed. As for the security architecture, it's just some sort of during Anthony mentioned that I worked in Brussels, and I always used to give my EU friends this example on the Helsinki process, for example. Helsinki process brought stability to the European continent for decades. And notwithstanding bilateral relations, even the Soviet Union was somehow associated to the Helsinki process because the primordial interest was to safeguard the stability of the European continent. Something along this model, but something also that has an economic track. If you look at the trade volume between the countries of the region, it's very scarce. So why would they come together if they don't have mutual interest? I think I always used to give this example when I participated in the Union for the Mediterranean, which is one of the EU initiatives meetings. So the Union for the Mediterranean is the 27, are they 27? Yes. EU member states. And the southern neighbors, which are the Mediterranean countries, so 3% of the trade exchange were south-south, 8% were south-north, and the rest was north-north. And this body of nations, which is 53 countries, I think. So the stakes are very, very, very weak and between the countries of the region. You need an economic dimension, but most importantly, a security dimension where they meet, they define their rights and obligations in a mutually agreed way, and work for the stability and prosperity of the region, something along the Helsinki process.
Good, thank you. Now I'd like to ask for people questions from the people out of my sight. So from the sides, is there a question on that side? No? Question on that side? No, all right, back to the center then. Okay, so Lana at the back first, and then the gentleman here in the corner here. So Lana's in the white shirt. Okay, yeah, okay.
Hello, Ambassador. Thank you for being here. My name is Muhammad Shiri, and I'm studying social and cultural psychology. And my question is, do you think that the lack of reconciliation after the Civil War has contributed to the fragmentation of our society over time, which has enabled non-state actors to also kind of take control of these societies or micro-societies? And just a quick follow-up after that is, if you do think that, how do you think we can approach this from this point onwards to not go through this loop of wars and, fragmented governments?
Good, thank you. And then to penultimate row, white shirt.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for coming to speak to us. My name is Lana Boutour. I am an MSc student here at the LSE on the Complex Studies in Comparative Politics course. And I'm also Egyptian, so from a neighbor in the region. And I also had a question that relates to this idea of non-state actors. You mentioned the European Union as something that kind of saved Europe after the Cold War. The European continent has not had to deal with non-state actors in the same way that we in the Middle East have. And I was just wondering sort of what the future role of resistance groups, militias, and sort of malactors are in the Middle East, such as Iran and Israel, who have been frequent aggressors in our region, and how should Arab states be reacting to address these threats, not just to security, but also to our regional identity and national identities?
Okay, good questions.
Thank you. Yes, on Muhammad's question, of course, the grievances of the Civil War, which I think were not channeled out properly, definitely contributed to entrenching these identities, confessional identities. That's of course one very valid reason. Another reason I would give is the very weak nature of our political tools. Talking about a country who, although it is a democracy, although it has always had free speech, but let's face it, we don't have political parties. a political party is by definition a tool whereby people come together when they are like-minded, regardless of their original identities. They come together to try to advance and achieve what they believe in. We don't have that. So the so-called parties that exist in Lebanon give me, for example, what's the difference in the manifesto of, I don't know, you name it, take any two parties and try to analyze what's the difference in the economic manifesto or the economic aspirations of this or that party. These come together solely on a nostalgia having to do with the person. The only source of legitimacy is a person that played a role during the Civil War. So it's just himself. And that contributed to this entrenchment of the confessional identities. For people to move on, they need to come together based on what's their aspiration for their countries, regardless of where they come from or what's their ethnic or confessional or religious identity. And there is another, I think, also dimension that needs to be taken into account, which is the fragility of the state. As I said, the formula is very clear. When you have a strong state, you wouldn't have such of a strong non-state. It's very linear. So for the road ahead, I think supporting and building a state that is worth of this name is of utmost importance. At the same time, it should be an inclusive state. It cannot overlook the grievances that some non-state actors come with, because they have a genesis. They have a story. They came from a point of history where people decided to take things in their hand, to thinking that they were correcting the wrongdoing, and there was wrongdoing done against Lebanon, which is occupation. So all these ingredients should be taken into account. As for the other question, I think, well, the Arab countries, of course, if you compare the League of Arab States to the EU, I think the League of Arab States started few years before the precursor of the EU started. Look where the EU has become, and look at where is the Arab state, or the League of Arab States today. So in short, I think what the Arabs should bring to the equation is some sort of real and effective and serious multilateral action. There was a time when the world, the term national security, al-amn al-qawmi, was totally banned within the League of Arab States because it had a nationalistic connotation during the Cold War. So these countries never had any connotation of national, regional security, amn qawmi. And the other element also that I think was crucial in getting us to where we are is the absence of democracy. Because only when you are a democratically elected leader that you would be able to give up part of your prerogatives for the collective benefit of your constituency. Whereas if you're not democratically elected, why would you give up? You don't have a mandate, so you would never give up part of your. That's why you see the concept of sovereignty is so acute, is so heavily cherished in the Arab world, because that's the defense mechanism of the ruler, and that has always been the case. Part of your question was how to deal
malactors in the region, like Iran, Israel, and militias and resistance groups?
Well, with Israel, I think that Arabs have a plan. They have a plan for peace, which is called the Arab Peace Initiative. And I think that until and unless Israel reaches a point where it would be at a place where it would be ready to implement nothing more than international legality. The Arab Peace Initiative is nothing but a compilation of different United Nations Security Council resolutions, which in short give statehood to the Palestinians along the 67 borders and allow for, and of course, withdrawal from the Golan Heights, etc., etc. Unless this is concluded, I don't see Israel included in a regional order. You would tell me there are the Abraham Accords. Yes, the Abraham Accords. Well, first they are a derogation of the Arab Peace Initiative, because the Arab Peace Initiative is conditional, even in its text. It says if Israel withdraws to the 67 borders and accepts a Palestinian state, then and only then Arab countries will pursue normal relations with Israel. So it's a kind of reshuffling the priorities. That's why it didn't work. Well, it worked with the regimes, but as I said, unless and until the political track is addressed, no way Israel could be included in a regional order. Other actors, it's paradoxical. I mean, the three main actors in the region are not accounted for in any regional format or any regional order. You have Iran, you have Israel, and you have Turkey. There is no single format that accounts for them with the other countries of the region, and that's a flaw. Now, of course, Israel cannot be until there is the comprehensive peace that the Arab Peace Initiative speaks about. The others, I think there should be some sort of an accommodation, and it's not a nicety that you're doing to them. It's just you would need to sit with them, discuss and put your interests on the table and hold them responsible for your interests, and understand from the other side what would be their interests and try to find common ground. That's how countries work worldwide.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last round of questions. And this time I'll go to the side since I see a hand is up there. So the gentleman over there, and then the lady in the far side over there.
Hi, my name is Shadi. I'm a postgraduate student here at LSE. I'm also from Lebanon. So my question is about the 1701 resolution again. So to what extent can you convince the Lebanese people that this is a realistic and sustainable resolution? Because, I mean, we talked about in the last 17 years the resolution working relatively well, but I feel like in the past year everything that's happened cancels out these 17 years. I mean, we're looking at an utter collapse of international law, and it seems like the UN does not have any standing in this, like it's completely irrelevant, and we're dealing basically with a rogue state. So to what extent can you expect Lebanese people to get behind this resolution? Because for me, for example, as a Lebanese person, it frightens me to have the Lebanese army as the only armed group in the country. That's my question.
Okay. And the other end of the room.
Your Excellency, we'll ask for a concise answer, of course.
Mr. President, you're most welcome in LSE. I'm Hema Hnainen from Lebanon also. I'm a master's student in public policy. And I would like to pick on the national agenda. A lot of Lebanese people after the ceasefire are concerned about the scenario of 2006 post-war period. because we've seen the role of Hezbollah, how it evolved after 2006 war, reaching the triple financial crisis and the triple vacuum and 3 presidencies. So how much the role of the diplomacy in the internal reconciliation or the internal role among all political parties, that Hezbollah doesn't internally use its military power. So we've seen the aggressive diplomacy in having the ceasefire, but is there any aggressive diplomacy in ensuring that Hezbollah internally doesn't use its military power to contribute to any political dynamics as before? Thank you.
So as for the first question, of course there are no guarantees. Security Council resolutions always carry uncertainties. And one thing you should know, I think, that the Security Council resolution is assessed based on the moment it was adopted, and then throughout its implementation, it's a moving target. Sometimes the rapport de force changes from the moment where it was adopted and the moment when it's implemented. So no guarantees, of course, while Israel is what it is. But I believe that the Lebanese army has the first popular approval. Hopefully will increasingly have resources, the strength and the equipment to carry the mission. We've also have the guarantors. We have the US and France. Now you would tell me Palestinians had 1,000 guarantors, and here there are massacred by the hour. It's a new era that we should adapt to. And as I said, the subsequent what I refer to as national agenda will address all these concerns and assess whether this framework is suitable for the defense of Lebanon or not. And Lebanese collectively and inclusively will need to decide. And the same answer is also valid for your question. There are always risks, of course, but we should immediately start focusing on once and for all a deep and comprehensive national agenda that addresses all these concerns, including your concern, which should not be overlooked, because people also have been traumatized by history, both old and new. So all this should be put around the national dialogue table. We have this consensual political system, which as citizens we complain of, and we said it's inefficient, but that it has virtues. It has virtues that all concerns are addressed around the same table. But first we need a president, and we need a president with the intellectual acumen and the weight to lead such a process. We need immediately after a government that addresses the executive and the day-to-day, and we need to empower and equip the Lebanese army to carry out this very important mission. So in short, your concerns or uncertainties are valid, but I think that there is a new dynamic. If everybody gets it right, I think we're heading towards something positive for the history for the country.
Wonderful. And I know Anthony is keen to ask you one final question, looking to the future.
Thank you for this Q&A session. Thank you everyone for your questions. As Omar said, there's a lot of questions I couldn't ask. Talking about Lebanon always takes more than 1 hour and a half. But Your Excellency, we cannot discuss today's topic without evoking the Lebanese diaspora. Lebanese diaspora is a formidable community. Community of 15 million people globally, 3 times Lebanon's population. Renowned for its economic success and enduring ties to our homeland. For decades, this diaspora has been a lifeline for Lebanon, contributing through remittances and investments. At a time when Lebanon faces one of, or maybe its gravest crisis in its history, how can this globally dispersed yet deeply connected force be mobilized to aid reconstruction and economic political revival? Do you see any potential initiative like reverse brain drain, for example?
Yeah, definitely. It's the most precious asset that Lebanon has. We all know Lebanon lacks natural resources, hopefully with the oil and gas, offshore oil and gas. But its main wealth is the human resources, both at home, but also and mainly in the diaspora. I'm sure you are aware that it's a very unique situation where you have 4 or 5 million at home and maybe 12, if not more, abroad. Similar, I think, are the Irish, maybe the Greeks. The Irish, for example, and it happens that I'm also ambassador to Ireland, they have crafted very unique and outreaching schemes to reach out to their diaspora, and the Irish diaspora was always part of the prosperity of the country. So the contribution today of the Lebanese diaspora is, I think, underexploited. Of course, remittances, of course, sending or buying some property in Lebanon, but the potential is much more. Except that it's up to us Lebanese to build a product that is appealing for them. First, give them confidence. And second, give them the opportunity to participate and to contribute in the national life of the country. And I think we would be able to see miracles, because you cannot imagine how much first wealth, the Lebanese wealth globally is unimaginable. But also mobilization and the eagerness to do something for the country. Except that we have not managed to find this product yet, that is this anchor that is appealing to them in a professional and modern way, beyond the hummus and tabbouleh, something really structured, well structured, and I'm sure that in the period ahead, we all talk now about hopefully new Lebanon emerging, or renewed Lebanon emerging. That will be one very important avenue of what this new Lebanon should look like, which is a credible outreach policy towards the diaspora.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this beautiful answer, and I would like to conclude this event with this optimistic mind. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude this evening, let us reflect on the challenges Lebanon faces and the resilience and solutions required to overcome them. On behalf of the Lebanese Society at LSE, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to His Excellency Ambassador Mortada for his precious insight and candid reflections. I also sincerely thank Professor Omar McDoom for his thoughtful contribution as an expert co-chair and for moderating this dialogue with me. Before you leave, I kindly invite you to scan the QR code just here, which will take you to the Lebanese Red Cross website. In these critical times, every contribution, no matter the size, makes a real difference in supporting Lebanon. As Lebanon's greatest voices, Khalil Gibran said, Out of suffering have emerged the strongest soul, and the most massive characters are seared with scars. These words remind us that out of hardship can emerge recovery, resilience, and renewal. Values we must uphold as we rebuild our beloved southern country. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we hope this evening.
Concludes today's event. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.